What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 5 best builds in Path of Exile 2 0.4 The Last of the Druids. So in this guide I will give you a quick overview of each setup, then I will explain what skill gems and upgrades should you focus on, then as well we'll see the best gear and how to get it, and then finally we will go over the passive skill tree, the stats, your skill rotations, and even what atlas passive should you use, so we would be able to get the highest damage possible and much more. And remember, if you want to be up to date, so check any of these builds, look up the best items, the skill trees and powder building, then check my links in the description. And if you ever played POE 2 for long enough, then you know that the grind for currency can feel endless, and that's where SkyCoach comes in. They are a trusted platform used by over 150,000 gamers worldwide. They provide pro player support in more than top 25 games, including POE 2. No matter if you need faster start, help with tough content, or just want currency delivered safely and quickly, then SkyCoach has you covered. What I really like is how smooth the whole process is, from click to gameplay in minutes, clear and fast chats with their team, plus if an order is not fulfilled, you get an instant refund. So if you wanna skip the grind and enjoy POE 2 your way, then click the link in the description to check them out, and use my code CADE for 10% off. So, Cyclone has effectively returned to POE 2 in the form of the Whirling assault, and when you combine it with the Titan's ascendancy, armor stacking, stun abuse, and the charge scaling, the result is one of the most dominant melee builds that you've ever seen. This is a spin to win build in its purest sense: one button to clear maps, one button to generate combos, and one button to stun entire screens. You're constantly moving, constantly attacking, and constantly scaling damage just by existing near enemies. And the craziest part is that this build does all of that while being nearly unkillable. We are talking about 80,000 armor in maps with room to push even further. The Titan's Ascendancy is hands down the best ascendancy in the game for armor stacking, and this build abuses that fact to the absolute maximum. The hulking form alone turns small armor nodes into massive power spikes, then crushing impacts gives us ridiculous stun buildup and multiplicative damage against stun and heavy enemies. Then Stone Skin multiplies armor from the body armor by pushing defensive scaling into insane territory. And finally, Colossal Capacity rounds everything out by giving raw stat scaling that makes entire builds feel smooth and effortless. What really pushes this build over the edge is how everything stacks together. Armor stacking will feed survivability. Survivability will let you stay spinning, and staying spinning increases the stun uptime. Then that stun uptime feeds crashing impacts. The crashing impacts will increase damage. Then that damage will feed charge generation, and those charges will feed falling thunder. And then finally, the falling thunder will delete bosses. So as you can see, every system will reinforce the next one, and nothing feels wasted or clunky. So let's take a look at the specifics, and first we have our skill gems. At the core of this entire setup is the Whirling assault, and everything else exists to amplify that what the skill already does naturally. The Whirling assault is your movement skill, your clear skill, your combo generator, and your damage engine all at once. You're always hitting, always moving, and always progressing forward, which makes the gameplay feel incredibly fluid. Then Mantra of Destruction is also one of the most important buttons for this build. This skill handles power charge generation and provides massive damage boost that scales multiplicatively with several other mechanics. Those power charges are then consumed by the charge regulation to gain multiplicative critical strike chance, and further leveraged by the charge staff for additional damage and utility. This charge engine is what allows this build to scale damage without needing insane weapon investment. Then Tempest Belt is your control and the burst amplifier. Against rares and bosses, placing one or two bells will dramatically increase our stun buildup, apply repeated hits, and even create windows where enemies simply cannot attack. With crushing impacts, the stunned enemies will take significantly increased damage, which means every bell will dramatically increase our effective DPS. Then Falling Thunder is the boss killer. This skill consumes power charges and deals fully multiplicative damage per charge. When combine that with the Mantra of Destruction, the Tempest Belt, and Armor Break, the Falling Thunder can outright one-shot bosses or remove massive chunks of their health instantly. This one is not required for mapping, but it turns bossing into a joke. Then supporting gems provide Armor Break through the Scavenge Plating or Armor Break, then shock effects through the flat lightning damage on the gear, and optional spirit auras like the Overwhelming Presence, if you have enough spirit to support it. Even without optimal auras, the build performs at extremely high level. Next up, moving on to the passive tree. This setup is designed to maximize the Whirling assault efficiency through armor stacking, stun scaling and AoE explosion as well as charge synergy, while remaining extremely point efficient. The padding prioritizes clusters that give us multiple layers of value at once rather than isolated damage bonuses. A large portion of the tree is invested into the armor and defensive clusters, especially those near the lower and the left sections of the tree. These include multiple small armor nodes, increased armor from body armor, and general physical mitigation passives. Combined together, these nodes will scale extremely hard and form the backbone of this build's survivability. The tree will intentionally avoid evasion and instead fully commit to the armor scaling, which synergizes with our gear choices and other mechanics later on. Then stun buildup and melee control nodes are second major focus. The several notables and surrounding small nodes will grant increased stun buildup, stun duration and bonuses against heavy or stunned enemies. These are placed along the main damage path rather than being bonuses, as this will ensure that every hit will contribute to both control and damage. This allows rares and bosses to be locked down consistently once the Whirling Assault is active. This tree also heavily invests into the AoE and melee attack scaling, so AoE nodes are taken deliberately to expand Whirling Assault's hit radius near to the full screen levels, which greatly improves mapping speed and the combo generation. Attack damage and melee physical damage clusters are also stacked in alongside the AoE so that the clear speed and single target damage will scale together. And then finally, the charge interaction is another key element. This tree will path into the power, frenzy and endurance charge related passives by enabling very strong synergy with external charge generation and sources. Overall, these nodes will provide increased damage, attack speed, defenses, while also supporting burst windows at the same time. This setup takes the advantage of one of the most broken ascendancy mechanics in the game, so sacrificing minions for the raw character stats, and then scaling those stats into the screen-wide damage that deletes everything before it can even see you. This is not a traditional minion build, and it is not a conventional caster either. Instead, it's a high investment, high ceiling monster that converts spirit and sacrificed minions into overwhelming damage output and near constant screen control. At its core, this build abuses the abyssal lich ascendancy by stacking enormous amount of spirit, reserving massive numbers of archers, and then turning sacrificed minions into the permanent offensive and defensive bonuses. We are not relying on the minion AI to clear the map for you. The minions exist just to be consumed by empowering you directly, while the spells will blanket the entire screens in overlapping damage zones. And the result is a build that is unstoppable once fully assembled, with damage scaling that most players have never experienced. At the endgame, this build will offer some of the highest consistent DPS in the game, insane clear speed through AoE stacking, and boss damage that makes all content easy. The Abyssal Lich does not negotiate with enemies, it just erases them. So, if you're looking for a build that feels truly different, one that pushes the Path of Exile's 2 systems to their limits, and rewards deep mechanical understanding and investment, then this is it. So, let's take a look at the specifics, and first we have our skill gems. The skill gem setup is where the AoE stacker will come to life, because every single choice will reinforce the same goal, so massive AoE coverage, constant triggering, and scaling damage through the sacrificed minions and the spirit reservation. We are using warp-based mechanics and AoE scaling minions, while reserving an enormous amount of spirit to sustain skeletal archers that exist purely to be consumed for the power. The primary engine of our build revolves around the spell slinger and the cast on elemental element, which allows us to automate large portions of our damage while still actively positioning and controlling the battlefield. Then ball lightning and ice nova serves as the primary AoE damage sources by overlapping repeatedly as enemies are dragged through the stacked spell zones. Lightning warp will play 2 roles here, so both as mobility and a damage booster when combined with the aerial scaling, which allows us to reposition instantly while detonating entire packs in the process. Then frost wall is used not defensively but offensively, by forcing enemies to remain inside their overlapping damage fields, while also enabling additional triggers. Then malice and siphon elements are combined in together to further boost damage taken by the enemies, ensuring that once something is caught in the area it does not escape. Then on the minion side, the Skeletal Frost Mage, Skeletal Arsonist and the Skeletal Sniper are all reserved primarily for the spirit scaling and the sacrificed interaction. These minions are not meant to survive, their main purpose is to fuel the Abyssal Lich ascendancy by providing raw stats and the multiplicative scaling when sacrificed. The sheer number of reserved archers enabled by the extreme spirit stacking is what pushes this build over the edge. Next up, moving on to the passive tree. We want to build this almost entirely around scaling AoV, spell damage, intelligence, and the spirit's efficiency, while picking up key minion nodes purely for sacrifice value, rather than traditional minion damage. This is not a setup that spreads itself thin. Instead, every path is taken deliberately and feeds directly into the build score loop. At the top of the tree, you can clearly see the heavy investment into the AoV clusters, which dramatically increase the size of the ball lightning, ice nova, and the lightning warp interactions. These nodes are what allowed the build to function as a true AoV stacker, by turning modest base skills into the screen-wide damage zones. Intelligence stacking will also further amplify this effect by scaling mana, energy shield, and the overlapping spell effectiveness. Then also, we get few minion nodes. We are not scaling minion survivability or attack speed in a traditional sense. Instead, we focus on nodes that increase minion life, spirit efficiency, and effects gained from the minion sacrifice. These nodes will directly translate into the more stats for Abyssal Lich, which makes each sacrificed minion much more impactful. Energy shield scaling is also a major focus, as this build leans heavily into the energy shield for survivability. The larger flat energy shield nodes, recharge rate, and faster recharge at the start are all prioritized by ensuring that even in dangerous fights, the build will recover almost instantly after taking even a slight of damage. This setup is all about turning your warrior into a walking volcano by scaling ignite from massive slams and leaving entire packs of enemies burning in your footsteps. If you ever wanted a build that feels heavy, brutal, and explosive all at once, then this is it. The heart of this build comes from three key skills: Volcanic Fissure, the Forge Hammer, and the Stampede. Volcanic Fissure splits the ground open in a wave of lava, then the Forge Hammer lands a crashing blow that ignites even the tankiest targets, and Stampede finishes off by making every step you take rip the battlefield apart. Together, they will give you an unmatched clear speed and boss damage that melts targets. What makes the build shine is setting enemies on fire. Because Ignite scales off the size of your hit, every massive slam you land will translate into a burn that continues to deal damage for several seconds. That means your Forge Hammer or the Volcanic Fissure is just not one hit. It's essentially gets stretched over several times, and the bigger impact, the bigger the burn. The bosses that might usually take ages to grind down will start melting away as you rotate through the skills. And another important thing to know is that while many melee builds were slowed down by the armor explosion nerf this patch, the Fire Warmbringer is still OP. Ignite scaling was not affected by those changes, which makes the setup stand out as most consistent and rewarding warrior build in the game right now. It's super strong for mapping, devastating for bosses, and it feels smooth for the leveling all the way into the red maps. So let's break down the skill gems, and your main clearing tool is the Stampede. And honestly, this is one of the most fun melee skills in Path of Exile 2. Every step you take will proc fissures under your feet, and once you've linked it with the supports like the Crater and the branching fissures, it turns into a chain reaction of eruptions that wipe out monsters without you even needing to stop moving. The mapping feels incredible with this skill, because you're literally killing while stripping through the zones. For single target, you've got a rotation that feels deliberate and powerful, and against rares or bosses, you will start with Infernal Cry if you have access to it, because that weakens enemies and primes them for explosions. Then you slam them with the Forge Hammer, following up by the Volcanic Fissure, and finally you pop Ancestral Cry to boost your exerted attacks. From there, we transition into the Stampede until the targets burn down. If you don't have the Ancestral Cry yet, then you can simply rely on the Infernal Cry to fill that slot, and you will see huge ignite damage rolling over time. Especially for tanky bosses, dropping a War Banner before you start your rotation will add that extra push you need. And one quick tip here, keep your War Banner at a low level. Leveling it up increases dexterity requirements without giving you much more power, so you actually save yourself some stat headaches by leaving it underleveled. It's still incredibly effective, but you don't need to overcommit points into dexterity just to keep it online. Then for supports, the first place that you want to invest your quality is the Stampede, since that's your main clearing skill and it scales beautifully with the early investment. When it comes to the Jevels, there are two things to look out for. The new unique The Jevel Heart of the Will is a game changer by giving you both maximum life on a kill and extra fire damage. Then for rare Jevels, aim for stats like the added rage on a hit, increased damage against enemies with the broken armor, and even the block chance for survival. These will scale your damage while also shoring up defenses, which is the perfect balance for a melee fire build. Then next up we have the passive tree. And you want to start at this section and move into the clusters that emphasize melee damage, slam effectiveness and the Warcry synergies, since Ignite is our main damage source, so we prioritize the fire multipliers and burning damage nodes, making sure that every big hit we land translates into the sustain burning. Then physical to elemental conversion nodes are also key here, since they let us turn the Raw strength into devastating fire output. Defenses are built directly into the progression, so maximum life scaling is everywhere, combined with strong investments into the armor and endurance charges. Endurance charges aren't just for defenses, they also tie into the Warbringer synergies and empower your exerted attacks. This keeps you both tanky enough to stay in the melee range and consistent enough to deliver empowered blows every few seconds. The Warcry nodes are another cornerstone of the tree. The cooldown reduction and exerted attack bonus are critical, since our whole single target rotation relies on weaving the Warcry into the slams. By reducing cooldowns and increasing their effect, we make sure that our infernal and ancestral cries are always ready when we need them. There's also room here for scaling AoV, which feels fantastic with the skills like the Volcanic Fissure. Bigger coverage here mean faster map clearing, but it also ensures that your slams reliably ignite every enemy in a pack. This build blends lightning-fast spellcaster gameplay with an automated, screen-shattering comet barrages that create a playstyle that feels fast, explosive, and utterly dominant from the league start and transitioning all the way to the pinnacle bosses. This build looks insane and it delivers. The fire infusion comets will hit like a truck, with massive ignites on top, while cold infusion sparks will chain across the screen for endless clear pressure. The gameplay feels like a traditional spark build, but with godlike benefit of cast on critical procs. And also, we got the triple orb of storms that chain lightning everywhere, and permafreeze every enemy in the site to lock them down and delete. Our damage output is off the charts, with the comet shotgun bursts visibly deleting rares and the chunky ubers or 100k plus hits, while the spark chains maintain blistering clear speed in the dense maps. Then defensively, the build is peak tankiness, so Chaos Inoculation with a massive energy shield pull will ignore all chaos, and then we stack on the permafreeze for the cold conversion via the Call of the Brotherhood, and this screen-wide spark coverage will keep the enemy shattered and immobile, by giving our energy shield enough time to recharge after big hits. This will complement the energy shield playstyle perfectly, so you tank railguns, then freeze the retaliation, and then recharge to full before the next phase. On top of that, even if the comet misses a beat, your sparks alone will carry the maps and bosses. And this is what makes the build special. We are a pure spellcaster at the heart, with a cast on crit comets as the ultimate force multiplier. So let's take a look at the specifics, and first we have our skill gems. The heart of this build is the perfect synergy between the trigger skills and infusion management, all scaling through the spell damage, critical strikes and the elemental equilibrium keystones for the flipped infusions. Our primary trigger is the spark, supported by the lightning mastery, the rapid casting, projectile acceleration, efficiency and the pinpoint critical, and the recent buffs to the zeniths too will make it a killer swap later, for a massive damage at 90% mana. The spark is very OP, as we could infuse him with the 7 elements and the EE, which chains off the triple orb of storms for insane coverage and the crit ramp up for 60% base. Then next we got a cast on critical comet, linked to the efficiency too, pinpoint critical, raising tempest and the cold mastery. But we can also swap the cold for the zenith post mana fix. This procs fire infused comets on the crits by shotgunning bosses and obliterating groups with over 100k fire and cold hybrids with a huge ignite. We also use no elemental penetration to preserve mana, as we are prioritizing raw DPS efficiency on a budget. Then Orb of Storms triples up with the left click Unleash. Supported by efficiency, consider casting over Abundance, Unleash and the pinpoint critical. We can also ditch considered for Zenith once the mana flows. These orbs will chain lightning on every spark. Then build your crit meter and generate cold infusions for the sparks blasts. Then next we have the Frost Bomb, which is your infusion engine, supported by the spell cascade, over Abundance, the short fuse and the potent exposure. We just tap it to get exploding fire infusions for the comets, and plus exposure for the chill synergy. On top of it, utility will shine with the weapon swap binds, so we get the Sigil of the Power on the Chimming Staff, which we beef up by Magnified Area, Prolonged Duration and the cooldown recovery, for the permanent damage boosts while spending mana. Then Elemental Weakness will share the swap, supported by the Focus Curse, Expanse, Prolonged Duration and the Cursed Ground, or even the Hex Bloom for the speed clear. We usually plan it for set and forget debuffs that apply everything nearby. And finally, Convalescence is your panic button by instantly kicking Energy Shield Recharge with the prolonged duration and cooldown recovery. Next up, moving on to the passive tree. This build focuses on scaling spell crit and the ES recharge, while solving mana forever and balancing massive offense with unkillable defenses in the most efficient path possible. The core psychology here is simple. We pump crit to 60% via the tree nodes, like the Careful Assassin and Controlling Magic, and then multiply it through the Pinpoint Critical and the Malorgris gloves that ignore its downside for the pure crit multi-explosions. From there, we branch into the spell damage, the cold and lightning scaling, and the remnant pickup for the Stormweaver synergy. So remnants respawn every 3 seconds, which fuels infusions non-stop. Also, Energy Shield is very important, so Chaos Inoculation Keystone is key. All clusters like the Patient Barrier, Enhanced Barrier, and the Dampening Shield will boost our pull to 8k. Then mana efficiency is also non-negotiable, so get things like Efficient Casting, Conservative Casting Anoint, and Regen nodes that ensure that Zenith 2 will shine without the flasks. The weapon set split is also crucial. So set 1, aka the Reds, will own damage nodes for the Spark, EOS and COC, and then the set 2, aka the Greens, are utility tools like the Curses for the huge AoV. And then we round out our utility with the cast speed, presence, AoV for the orbs, freeze buildup and the shock magnitude with the alternating current. This will cold shock everything thanks to the Shaper of the Storms. Overall, the streak has no bloat here. Every point stat will double down, from Physic Fragmentation for the extra projectiles, to Magnitude Amps for the dual and shock chills. This tree is made intuitive, as we transition seamlessly from the Spark League starter by swapping Lightning for the cold crit and the Energy Shield setup. This is a one-button build that looks insane on the screen, feels incredible to play, and got a very real damage buff going into 0.4 thanks to the changes how the Nova projectiles function. This is an attack-based movement build that blurs the line between the clear speed and single target. You're constantly moving, constantly generating charges, and constantly detonating the screen with the Falling Thunder. The entire build revolves around using the Whirling Slash as both your movement tool and the engine. You generate power charges simply by moving through the enemies, and then consume those charges with the Falling Thunder to create massive Nova explosions that clear the entire packs instantly. The visuals are honestly a huge part of why this build feels so good. The slams will feel heavy, the lightning novas will fill the screen, the terrain DPS will bounce everywhere, and everything will just evaporate around us. It's one of those builds where the gameplay feels natural instead of forced. You're not setting up combos, you're not managing 5 different cooldowns, you're just moving, slamming and watching enemies die. So let's start with the skill gems. At the core of this setup is the Falling Thunder. Falling Thunder is designed as a single target skill that scales incredibly hard when consuming power charges. On its own, it's already strong, but once you introduce the Nova projectiles, it turns into a full screen clearing monster. With proper charge generation, the Falling Thunder can fire up to 21 projectiles in a full circle around you, all piercing and all capable of chaining off terrain and doing insane amount of DPS. Then Whirling Slash is the real engine of the build. This skill does not exist to deal damage, it exists to hit as many times as possible, as fast as possible and while moving. Every hit is a chance to crit, and every crit is a chance to generate the power charges. We are not standing still while attacking, we are moving through the enemies, generating everything you need passively. And this is why the build feels like a one-button setup, even though technically we're using 2 skills. Then next, the Herald of Thunder will play a massive role in smoothing out the power charge generation. It provides additional hits, additional crit chances, and will help to keep the engine running, even when the enemy pack density dips. This becomes especially important in awkward map layouts, or when transitioning between the packs. Then Infernal Cry is optional, but extremely powerful in early and mid investment. It provides a huge chunk of extra damage as fire, and while it's not mandatory to press consistently, it can dramatically boost the burst when you need it, and later on you can drop it if you want a cleaner one-button experience. And then on defensive side, the Ghost Dance and Wind Dancer are both mandatory. Ghost Dance provides recovery and mitigation through the Ghost Shrouds, while the Wind Dancer will add additional avoidance and synergize extremely well with how often you're moving and getting hit. And then Charge Regulation and the Combat Frenzy will come in once you have the Spirit to support them. These simply will provide additional crit chance, charge generation smoothing and the movement speed. Next up, moving on to the passive tree. In this entire tree exists just to support the charge generation, crit scaling and defensive stacking. We aggressively path into the critical strike chance and the critical damage early, because these crits are the lifeblood of the build. If you're not critting, you're not generating power charges, and if you're not generating the power charges, then the Falling Thunder does nothing. This is why you should not transition into the build too early. You simply won't have enough passive points to support it until the later levels. We also heavily invest into the evasion and deflection. These two mechanics will roll independently, which means even if you fail an evasion roll, you will still get a chance to deflect. When you deflect, you will take significantly reduced damage, and with additional deflection scaling on the tree, this reduction will become extremely powerful. Then skill effect duration is deceptively important here as well. It helps to smooth out the Ghost Dance uptime, Wind Dancer's interaction, and even the overall loop stability. The build will feel much worse without it, even though it's not immediately obvious why. And then Jewel sockets are also priority, so get crit chance, crit damage, attack speed and defensive stats will all scale extremely well. And as we know, a few well-rolled Jewels can fix problems that would otherwise require major gear upgrades.